In 2009, the Minnesota Timberwolves made the biggest draft choice of the century when they passed on Stephen Curry not once, but twice.
The Golden State Warriors select Stephen Curry from Davidson College.
Of course, it's normal for teams to pass on future star players because there's no sure way of knowing whether or not that guy would become a superstar. The Wolves, on the other hand, had 2 straight draft picks, but didn't use any of them to draft the man who would become the greatest shooter of all time. And this oversight is unheard of because no front office could be that bad. Still, there was a pretty good reason why the Wolves passed on Curry twice. To understand the bigger story behind the Wolves' blunder in 2009, you might want to stick around for a few minutes. It's 2009, and a baby-faced college player named Stephen Curry is the darling of the nation. He was leading the entire country in scoring by doing things no one had ever seen before. Curry was hitting outside shots at a rapid rate while also scoring in the paint incredibly well for a 6'2" guy who was never the most athletic player at the point guard spot. But the level of skill Curry was playing at was unseen before, as he was leading a smaller college program that was never known to be very successful. Although he didn't win any major championships or awards in college, Curry came into the 2009 NBA draft as a crowd favorite because fans love a good underdog story.
Another steal. Driving on Smith, creates the space and knocks down the long jumper.
And despite the fact that he is now one of the greatest basketball players of all time, Curry was a true underdog because he wasn't highly recruited out of high school due to his smaller frame and lack of athleticism. Coming into the draft, Curry wasn't a favorite among scouts. He was a bit older than most rookies and didn't have any real athletic abilities that made him stand out. That's why the bigger, more athletic guys like Blake Griffin, Tyreke Evans, and James Harden were heavily favored as possible top 5 picks. Curry, on the other hand, was a lottery talent, but not good enough to get chosen within the top 5. Interestingly, though, the Minnesota Timberwolves, a team that was never known for being successful, had the 5th and 6th pick of the draft. The top 4 picks were already set. Blake Griffin, a big and athletic monster, was the consensus top overall pick. He may have turned into a bust, but Hasheem Thabeet actually showed signs of becoming the next Dikembe Mutombo. The OKC Thunder, meanwhile, got James Harden with the 3rd pick. Tyreke Evans got chosen 4th because, although he never became a star, he had an NBA-ready body and skill set.
On to Evans as Bonner tries to slow him down and quickly trying to match up. Evans, though.
So with that, the Wolves had every opportunity to draft Stephen Curry, the crowd darling. But instead of choosing Curry with the 5th pick, the Wolves selected Ricky Rubio, the Spanish marvel who turned pro at a very young age. Of course, you could forgive the Wolves for that choice. Rubio impressed a lot of people when the teenager performed incredibly well during the 2008 Olympic Games as part of the Spanish national team. He was a young phenom in Spain and was one of the best passers in the world even at a young age. The Wolves believed that Rubio's passing abilities would translate into the NBA during an era when point guards were more known for setting people up rather than making plays for themselves. This was a forgivable choice because Rubio actually showed flashes of brilliance and was a lot younger than Curry at that time. But the Wolves had the next pick. People were expecting them to draft Curry, or if they didn't want to draft another point guard, they should have drafted a forward or a big guy. Instead, they selected another point guard named Johnny Flynn.
The Minnesota Timberwolves select Johnny Flynn from Syracuse University.
Puzzling a lot of people who never saw Flynn play, but were fans of Curry's outrageous scoring abilities in college. Then, with the Golden State Warriors now free to choose anyone with the 7th pick, they chose the best available player. Curry became a Warrior, and the rest is history because he's won 2 MVPs and 4 championships and is the greatest shooter of all time. This was the best draft choice the Warriors have made since drafting Wilt Chamberlain decades ago. On the other hand, the Wolves became the laughingstock because they passed on a future Hall of Famer for 2 point guards who never reached a quarter of the success that Curry reached. Ricky Rubio didn't even get to the NBA until 2 years later because he was still under contract in Spain. On the other hand, Johnny Flynn became a forgotten man after putting up respectable rookie numbers. Still, Curry was far better even when they were both rookies. But how in the world did the Wolves pass on Stephen Curry but choose 2 point guards? Well, there's no exact reason that's been confirmed, but there were rumors. Del Curry, Stephen Curry's dad, told Minnesota that they didn't want their son playing there. Steph didn't even work out for the Wolves. Del and Steph's agent told the Wolves that they didn't want them drafting him, and there were good reasons. The rumored reason was that Steph, a big fan of golf, didn't want to stay in Minnesota because of the cold weather and near impossibility of enjoying golf there. But another rumor is that Minnesota is too small of a city for him to grow his brand. In fact, reports were saying that the Curry camp wanted the top 7 teams in the draft to pass on him because he wanted to go to the New York Knicks, who had the 8th pick in the draft. But even if Curry didn't want to play for the Wolves, draft rules and rookie contract restrictions made it impossible for him to choose where he wanted to go. If the Wolves did indeed draft Steph, he didn't have a choice but to play for them and work his way to star status so that he could earn a solid contract. And even if he wanted to leave after the expiration of his rookie contract, the Wolves could have matched any offer to keep him in Minnesota. So basically, Curry would have had to play for Minnesota for at least 5 years. In fact, that's what the Warriors did when they drafted him, knowing that Curry had no choice but to play for them, and he wasn't in the position to demand trades because he wasn't even that good back then. Still, despite knowing that Curry would have had no choice but to play in Minnesota, the Wolves still passed on him. And the man to blame is David Kahn. Kahn had just been brought in as the Wolves' president of basketball operations to replace Kevin McHale just a month before the draft. He wasn't in the best position to be making draft choices because he wasn't even ready to take on the role. Even if it was still true that Curry never wanted to be in Minnesota, the Wolves could have gotten assets from him by trading him to his preferred destination. However, he still chose Rubio and Flynn instead of Curry. According to Sports Illustrated, Kahn said that he drafted Rubio and Flynn because they reminded him of Earl the Pearl Monroe and Walt Clyde Frazier, the solid backcourt that helped the New York Knicks win the NBA championship in 1973. Kahn, although born on the West Coast, was a big fan of the Knicks. And for some reason, he thought that Rubio and Flynn could become the next coming of Monroe and Frazier, even though they played nothing like those Knick legends. Let's just say that Kahn didn't stay too long in the NBA. 4 years after making the biggest blunder of his life, he got fired from his job, but not before making a few bad choices again. In 2010, the Wolves chose Wesley Johnson with the 4th overall pick, passing on guys like DeMarcus Cousins, Gordon Hayward, and Paul George. In 2011, the Wolves had the 2nd overall pick, but chose Derek Williams over Kemba Walker, Klay Thompson, and Kawhi Leonard. So it was clear that Kahn didn't know what he was doing. He basically set the Minnesota Timberwolves franchise back by 4 years as the team struggled to make the playoffs and had one of the longest playoff droughts in the NBA. In 2018, however, a longtime beat writer named Jerry Zagata tweeted that the real reason why Kahn didn't draft Curry was that he was worried about how durable he could be at the point guard position. Well, he wasn't wrong though, because Steph suffered a serious ankle injury that almost held his career back in 2012. But Kahn was still wrong for choosing Flynn, whose injuries were the reasons he could never stay long in the NBA. But when Kahn left the team in 2013, he actually doubled down on his decisions in 2009 by saying that he didn't make a mistake in passing on Curry. It was a case of one man's pride refusing to make him admit that he made a mistake. But the numbers clearly weren't on Kahn's side. After all, the Wolves went 89-223 in his tenure as the team's general manager, making it clear that he probably didn't know anything about running an NBA team and choosing the right talents for the job. So basically, one man's weird vision for the Wolves eventually cost them the chance to have the greatest shooter in the world, leading them to the playoffs and quite possibly championships. Luckily, the Wolves have recovered well enough from their blunder in 2009 by drafting Karl Anthony Towns in 2015 and Anthony Edwards in 2020. The Wolves are now in the position to compete for a championship because the current front office has done a great job of scouting the right draft choices and bringing in the best free agents who fit the team's visions. Still, it would have been crazy to imagine what Steph Curry could have done for the Timberwolves if he had joined them in 2009. Or maybe the Wolves' bad decisions would have held him back and kept him from becoming one of the greatest players of all time. Who knows? All we know is that the Warriors didn't make a mistake in taking Curry when he was available.